All right, so let's talk about best practices when talking about coding. Yeah. So once again, most of the stuff we're going to present today is not going to make a big difference in terms of result, in terms of visual result on your app, but it could make the difference from the quality perspective. Yeah. So it feels very weird when you are interviewing a candidate and he or she is typing some code, ignoring all the standards, ignoring all the patterns, ignoring everything. Even if the result is right, even if what he or she is trying to achieve is correct, it feels weird, right? When the standards are not satisfied, because we got the standards because of a reason. Thanks to the standards, we can understand each other. Yeah. All right. So the first thing is, imagine that you are in the middle of a job interview and then they ask you to build something. And this is what they give you out of the box. They give you just a white page with some text on it, and they present you the HTML or the project, right? So what they used to do is, first of all, and of course, this is not about just following these steps. It's about expressing or sharing why you are following these steps. So what I like to do as a first step is just do a smoke test. You know what a smoke test is? Do you know when you turn 18 and you got the driving license and you got a very old car from any relative, like your uncle or your dad or whatever, your mom or whatever, and sometimes because it's a very old car, the engine doesn't switch on when you turn the key, and then what you do, or what you sometimes do, is you check from the back of the car, and if there is smoke coming out, that means that the engine is working. If there is no smoke, if the engine doesn't work, it's a bigger problem, right? So this is what we, historically speaking, call smoke test. It is true that the new generations with the electric cars probably won't understand that, but that's a different discussion. So let's do a smoke test. I'm going just to change the title, yes, because I just want to see if my browser reacts to my changes. If I need to do something weird, like writing a command, something like that. So let me just do a weird change, like for instance, Prince Harry stepped back from his royal duties, right? Fantastic. It's clearly working, yeah? So what Prince Harry will do now? Will he learn coding? Will he learn coding here at Codery? We'll figure out. Anyway, the app works. So now, imagine that our responsibility is to build a basic component, something we already learned yesterday. So, let me create a component. So to create a component, I will call it function. Say it again? Megan. Thanks, Megan. All right. Function thanks, Megan. And then, as part of that function, you know that, right? We did that yesterday. If you remember, return div, thanks Megan, have fun in Canada, where apparently they are at the moment on a secret location. Anyway. So this is a bit of gossip today. It's Friday. So now, can anyone tell me how do I render the thanks Megan component? Like that? With the what? With that? With dollar?
No, with
open parentheses?
No.
Curly brace?
The lesser than symbol.
That one? Yeah, and then what? Close?
No, close. Greater than symbol.
All right. Of course, I know, you know how to do it, right? But that's not the point. The point is to be able to be precise with the instructions. All right, so thanks, Megan. Have fun in Canada. It works, right?
Quick question.
Yeah.
The great on lesson song, did
Yeah.
that have another name?
No, not as far as I know.
Okay.
Not as far as I know. All right. Opening and closing, yeah. But there are different ways to refer to it, eh? Open tag, close tag, less than, greater than, I don't know. Anyway, so the first thing to note here is, did you notice the style of my component name? You see, it started with a capital and then all in lower cases, and suddenly the new word starts with capital again. So let me present you different syntax when talking about variable naming. So for instance, imagine that I create a variable, let me rephrase that. If I rename, to keep it simple, the component to thanks Megan in lowercase, does anyone know what's the name of this case? It's camel case, that's correct. Yeah? So technically speaking, we refer to that shape of variables where it starts with lower cases and only changes to uppercase when we find a new word as camel case. Why? Because it looks like the shape of a camel, maybe? Who knows, right? And what if if you're a PHP developer, I'm sure you're familiar with that syntax, right? With the underscore. What's the name of this case? As a snake case, correct, guys? Because it looks like a snake going up and down, once again, yeah? But the example we presented before, it was like camel case. However, the first word, the first letter, the first character, not the first word, started with a capital, with a big T. So what's the name of this case? Which one? Anyone? No one? That's Pascal, that's correct. This is what we call Pascal case. Because Pascal was the first language, Pascal is a very old programming language, yeah, very old, that originally introduced that sort of syntax. And what if in reality I want to use that, all these three examples, Pascal, Camel, and Snake, are generally speaking okay, generally speaking in JavaScript. But this one is not okay at all. You can see there are lots of errors. But anyway, I'm sure you already came across that. I mean, if you define an ID, look, if I create an ID, if ID equals thanks Megan, it's okay here, right? So in some particular cases, we can use that case. What's the name of this case? Kebab, that's correct, yeah? All the millennials call that kebab case, yeah? Why kebab? Because the hyphen, the dash, the minus symbol looks like the blade going through the meat on the off license when you come back from Fabric on Sunday, 6 a.m., yeah? If you are about 45 years old, you may remember that mature senior developers used to refer to that as Lisp case, because once again, Lisp was the first programming language to use it intentionally. So anyway, we've got different strategies, right? And apart from that, apart from the hyphen approach, apart from the kebab or Lisp case, all the others may work. However, depending on the scenario, we are invited to use one or the other. So, the first case, if I create a variable, let hello weekend, yeah, hello weekend equals true. Yeah, this is just a silly example. If I create a variable, I can do hello weekend or hello weekend or hello weekend, Pascal, Camel, Snake. Which one should we use and why? Camel? Why camel? Fish? The answer is good. It's a good answer, Fish. Camel case is the standard of JavaScript. But the standard defined by who? Who woke up one day and said, now we're going to write camel case? Someone is doing the community. That sounds very romantic. Yeah. But I want to be able, imagine that I'm not a JavaScript developer, and I want to figure out, is there any document written somewhere that I can check to know if I'm following the standards or not? No, that's wrong. So there are, when talking about the web, there are multiple companies involved trying to define standards. There are different types of standards. So for instance, we got, as Andrea says, the W3C. Yeah, I'm sure you already heard about that. Yeah, so this is a consortium, an international consortium that looks after the web in a very global way. When talking about JavaScript, only JavaScript, we can drill down a bit more. So, for instance, you know that in JavaScript you can use map, you can use find, you can use filter. You're doing training, you're using JavaScript methods. Who defines these methods? Who decides what is incorporated by JavaScript. So, say it again? MDN, no, that was extremely optimistic. MDN is just the documentation offered by the Mozilla Foundation, but that's something private, even though it's open source, blah, blah, no. Airbnb, okay, you're going one step beyond my expectation, right? So before talking about Airbnb and your holidays in Magaluf, let me present you TC39. So TC39, that's a group of people based in Switzerland, somewhere in the mountains. Probably not, right? Probably they are just on an average WeWork building in Zurich. But anyway, these guys, they decide what is JavaScript supporting, what are the new features in JavaScript. Yeah, they define the standard. There is a huge document of billions of pages where they decide how JavaScript works. Yeah. Historically speaking, TC39 was a very small group of few guys doing their own stuff. And because of that, if you look at very old JavaScript methods and properties and JavaScript behavior, there are some oddities, especially once you start working with dates and with some particular methods. It doesn't sound natural. It's like what these guys were drinking at the time they decided that. Yeah? Thankfully, because JavaScript has evolved, now TC39 is open to the community. It's very open. In other words, if you have a nice idea about how to improve JavaScript, you are more than welcome to create to post the idea on the GitHub project. If I go to Google and I search TC39 GitHub, so that's interesting. TC39, that's the name of the organization. And the name of the organization defines a standard, the document. The document that defines how JavaScript works is called ECMA script. And then JavaScript just runs this document, this standard. Yeah? So if you go to github.com/TC39, so essentially here you will find many different things, like for instance the proposals. See? So here you can see what the community is suggesting to improve JavaScript. Yeah? And that's pretty cool because you can see who decided that or who suggested that idea. Of course, you can check all the details about the idea. And FYI, there are, I think, 5 stages. So when you when you suggest an idea, it goes to stage 0, which is a draft. Then if a bunch of experts approve the idea, it goes to stage 1, and then stage 2, so it gets scaling. And eventually, when it goes to stage 4, that means that it's part of the standard. Yeah? I can give you an example. Probably next month, in February, we'll talk about asynchronous JavaScript. Yeah? So once we talk about asynchronous JavaScript, we will talk about something called promises. You may have heard about promises. Promises is something that someone created many years ago. It's like you, right? You can create a GitHub project about whatever. So one guy thought that it could be easier to deal with asynchronous JavaScript. He created a project, and the community loved that idea, to the point that a few years ago, back to 2015, so the idea was submitted to TC39 and they approved it. So now the idea that someone had on his garage or on his teenager's bedroom is part of the JavaScript standard. And that's fantastic. Imagine that you created a filter method and now everyone uses it, right? That's great. So that's the beautifulness of modern JavaScript. Yeah? Starting from 2015, every single year in summer, there is a new version of JavaScript. Yeah? I think the last one, I lost it. It's like 11, 10, I don't remember. ES10, I think is the name of the technical name of the standard. Yeah? So that's the thing. So these guys, they decide how you create a variable, let, how to create a function, how do you return. Yeah? This is the standard. So if you don't follow the standard, the code doesn't work. That's it. But what we're talking here is not about the standard. I mean, it doesn't matter if I create a variable like hello weekend or hello weekend or hello weekend, yeah? It will work. It will work. But there is another organization that, based on this, defines the best style to code in JavaScript. And that company, as Alex suggested, is Airbnb. It sounds a bit surprising, but if you don't trust me, if you search Airbnb JavaScript style guide on Google, you will find a very popular style guide, 91.7K stars, including mine, where they suggest, they invite you to write JavaScript code following a particular way of coding. And of course, it's really well structured, how to code with arrays, with objects, with strings, you know. And I think the beautifulness of this guide is that, look, you see, they tell you, they compare. So first of all, they tell you, how do you create a variable? With var or with const, for instance? They tell you, use const. And why? And they give you the reason. You may agree or you may disagree with the reason, but they are always trying to argue why they took that decision. Yeah? And of course, you can see bad and good patterns versus anti-patterns. Yeah? If you like the idea of learning by analyzing patterns versus anti-patterns, let me recommend you a workshop that I recorded last year. It was the most popular web event on Meetup in the United Kingdom last year, right? It's on the Codity platform. So if you go to best workshops, I think it's there somewhere, yeah? So in that workshop, I code with React by explaining how to do things right versus wrong. And we see the differences in terms of elegance, performance, and blah, blah, blah. All right, so Airbnb. And according to Airbnb, that is the best way of creating a variable in JavaScript, yeah? Using Camel case. But that's about variable names. What about components? Should we do that? Will that even work, guys? You see, if I use Camel case, will that even work? Let's have a look to our app. Look, first of all, nothing gets displayed, yeah? White page, empty page. So if you're in a job interview, if you are trying to build something and it doesn't work, what's the first thing you have to do? Correct, DevTools, fantastic, yeah? Because at the moment I'm blind. I mean, the only thing I know is it doesn't work, but I have no idea why it doesn't work. So let's go to DevTools and see if, you know, if we can find any relevant information. Aha, look, that's beautiful. So let me zoom that. Whenever you get errors, that's a really good starting point, right? Look, warning, thanks Megan, is using incorrect casing. Use Pascal case. Yeah? That's the beautifulness of React. Even if you don't know something, it will tell you. So let's change it to Pascal case as React suggests. And now, boom, here you go, it works again, right? Any questions? No? All right, so my next question is, another controversial aspect, single versus double quotes. You remember on Tuesday, I told you that whenever I'm creating a string in JavaScript, I prefer single quotes, personally. But in here, what we got is an HTML attribute. Should we use single or double quotes here, and why? Double? Why double, Alex?
When you look at it, you instantly know it's a string.
All right, so you think it's double because it looks like a string, but
So
it doesn't look like a string. All right, let's do something. Imagine that we are unsure whether we should use single or double. So let's check with Airbnb. Let's check what Airbnb thinks, because Airbnb style guide is not only about vanilla JavaScript, it's also about React.js. So if I go to Google and I search Airbnb React style guide, the React, let me find it. That one maybe? Yeah, looks good, right? Airbnb React style guide. And let me find, I'm sure they talk about that. That's somewhere. 7 quotes, fantastic, thank you. Yeah, you're right. Look, quotes. Always use double quotes for JSX attributes, but single quotes for all other JavaScript. So this is what I told you on Tuesday, but that's new, right? So according to Airbnb, we should keep double quotes for JSX attributes. Why? Let's try to find out the reason. Regular HTML attributes also typically use double quotes instead of single. So JSX attributes mirror this convention. That makes sense to me. Yeah? According to the old HTML standards, we use double. So if something works, what's the point of changing it, right? So I will use double quotes. Again, if I use single, it will work. So visually speaking, the result will be the same. But let's try to match the standards as much as possible. No, once again. So TC39, this is a group of people that defines ECMAScript, which is a big document. And this is just about the standard, the technical standard. So ECMAScript says that the way to declare a variable is by typing let instead of fish, for instance. Eh? If I type fish, it doesn't work. So they define the standard. But MBRE decides the styling. So if you don't follow what ECMA says, your code doesn't work. If you don't follow what Airbnb says, your code may work. It's about the styling. Things like empty lines. How many empty lines should I add? Will that make any impact on the result of my app? No. I can add 13 empty lines after every line of code, technically speaking. But I hope you agree with me that from an elegance point of view, that code looks a bit weird, right? Why do you have 13 empty lines in my code? Or indentation. Is that indentation right? I mean, it feels weird, right? That's just weird. But once again, will that break my code? No. In Python, it will. But in JavaScript, that's valid. Yeah? I know, also, let me try to find something on Google. So generally speaking, when you indent the code, you see, so you create, every time you put the curly braces or parentheses, you add a new line, and you add a new indentation, right? Indentation level. Like, let me show you, like that, yeah? Return, and then what is inside of return? A div, and what is inside of the div? A tag. You see the way we indent it, yeah? We go to the right, and then we come back. But there is a guy, and I thought he was joking, but apparently he was serious about that he prefers to indent the code following this Fibonacci sequence. Let me try to find that. Indent code Fibonacci sequence. Here you go, I think I found it. You know Fibonacci sequence? Well, so that's pretty much it, yeah? Indentation grows exponentially. I still believe he's joking. But I also get the feeling, because he's a sort of influencer, that other developers are thinking that he's actually serious about that. But anyway. Say it again? Where is the comment? Where is Waldo? Yeah. Yeah, I guess. I don't know. Yeah, once again, I never took that very seriously. Yeah. Anyway, so indentation, that's another styling advice. Indent the code like that, not following the Fibonacci or the... Can we follow the Brexit sequence? I'm sure someone is making jokes about that at the moment. Anyway, so that's the way we essentially indent and we declare our variables. Let me show you something else. Right, so we created our component, it's all good, it works. But now, mind that our app starts growing and we keep creating more components instead of thanks Megan, thanks Harry, thanks, blah, blah, blah. We create multiple functions. as you can imagine, eventually, your app.js file will grow. What do you think about dealing with big JavaScript files? Is it a good thing, a bad thing, and why? Why bad, Rochelle? Correct, correct. So if that file has 300 lines of code, that's bad, because it will take you a while to find out the information you are looking for. And that's one reason, that's a human reason. But let me give you a technical reason. Starting from the last month, you're going to work as part of a team app. In other words, at the moment, you are working by yourself. No one is really going to touch your code. But next month, you'll be collaborating on a project. Yeah? As part of that process, you may be touching the same file at the same time. Yeah? If I'm working with Esteban, yeah, I may be touching that file, app.js, and he on his computer, he may be touching the same file. So eventually, if once we both commit and push, so for instance, if my change is, thanks Megan, have fun in Canada, and Esteban says, thanks Megan, have fun in Mars, once we push the changes, there's a conflict, Kaini. That's right, there's a conflict. Which is the right option, Canada or Mars? There's a conflict. Conflicts, as you will suffer next month, is the worst part of coding. Because if the conflict is Mars versus Canada, I'm sure we can sit together and we can agree where Megan is at the moment. Yeah? But conflicts can go much more complicated to deal with, much more complicated, to the point that you may waste several hours of your life next month dealing with conflicts. Yeah? So, because that's a pain in the ass, the idea, the strategy is try to minimize conflicts. Yeah? Sometimes it's inevitable, sometimes conflicts will happen, but it's up to us to reduce the number of conflicts. And how can we reduce the number of conflicts? By dealing with multiple files. If I split that code into several files, it's less likely that Esteban and I will, by coincidence, touch the same file at the same time. Yeah? So that's what I would like to do now. I'm going to create a new file for my thanks Megan component. And in the long term, my advice is every time you create a component, you will start creating components on task number 7. Do it in a new file. Never ever have multiple components on the same file. Again, this is just a recommendation. Yeah? If you don't want to follow my advice, no worries. I will remember you next month. You'll fail once, not twice. Trust me. All right. So, how do we do that? First of all, let's start simple. Let's create a new file on my src folder called, how should we call the file? Well, look, if the component name is thanks Megan, my file will have the same name. Thanks Megan.js. Yeah, you see, I'm mimicking even the case. Why I do that? Because now I can cut that component and paste it here. Something like that. So if one day I come across that code and I see that there is a component called thanks Megan, I will ask myself, hey, thanks Megan, where the hell is that component? I will search. You know, you can search files in VS Code with Command P for Mac and Control P for Windows user. I will search thanks Megan and I will naturally find where the chicken of the component is. So, what do you think, guys? Do you think that if I go back to my Google Chrome browser, it will work as expected or not? And why? No?
No, you haven't improved.
That's correct. Look, let's see what happened. Ooh, failed to compile. Thanks Megan is not defined. In other words, we have a component here, thanks Megan, but what is that function here? Do you see that? It's nowhere. We deleted it. It's in a different file. True, that's true. However, JavaScript is unable to know where is that file. So what we have to do in that particular case is, first of all, we need to export that component. We need to make it available to other functions. And how do we export it? Look at the syntax. You have to type export, and now you have to type default in this particular case, because that's the only thing I want to export. Thanks, Megan. So that implies anybody can consume this function, like app.js. Can anybody figure out what else is missing here? To import, correct. You export a function and then you import it later on. And the syntax is relatively natural. Import, then the name of the function, thanks Megan, from, and now the location of thanks Megan. So how do we find the location? Look, as soon as I type dot slash, dot slash, that's a way to refer to the current folder. That has nothing to do with React, nothing to do with JavaScript. If you use a command line interface, it works in the same way. So dot slash will find files on the same folder as the current one. Thankfully, thanks Megan is a sibling, is a neighbor. You see, they are on the same folder. And even if I'm unsure about that, as soon as I type the slash, VS Code is listing the list of available components. And thanks Megan is one of these. Yeah, so if I select it, hopefully this time it will work. But it doesn't work yet because I forgot something. That's correct. That's correct. Look, that file, the main file, to me, looks perfect. I don't need to change anything else. However, from the thanks Megan component point of view, you need to be aware of something. Whenever you add React to a JavaScript file, I hope you agree with me, we are doing React here because of the JSX. Yeah? Without React, you cannot add HTML tags to your JavaScript. Yeah? That's something that the React made up. You see? Look at the help you get from VS Code. JSX, blah, blah, blah. React, blah, blah, blah. So this is clearly React related. So whenever you do a bit of React in your component, you have to import React. And to import React, simply type import React from React. That's the syntax you need to get used to. And finally, it works. You see? Thanks, Megan. Have fun in Canada. Yeah. So that's the strategy to set up different components in different functions. And let me tell you something else. A couple of things. What happens if in reality, we want to set thanks Megan and thanks Harry? So can I, for instance, do that? Can I create a new component and export it like that?
No, there are two defaults.
That's correct. That's not right. Export default makes sense if you only want to export one thing. Yeah? It used to work fine because there was a single function, but now we've got two functions. So we cannot do that. That's illegal. We need to export them without the default. And now, how do we import them? We need to add curly braces. So if you got a single export default, you import it like that. If you got multiple exports, you have to import them individually. Thanks Megan, comma, thanks Harry. That's the syntax. Once again, get used to it. That's it. I'm not asking you to tell me this sounds natural or easy to learn. Just get used to it. So thanks Megan, and then we can display, hopefully, thanks Harry. Yeah, makes sense? And then it works. So now, I got another question for you. What happened from a semantics point of view? Do you think that the thanks Megan file name is appropriate for this component? Why not, Anita?
Because they're thanking multiple people and the name is very specific.
Yeah, correct. It used to be okay when we only had thanks Megan, but now we got thanks Megan and thanks Harry. So to me, that file name is not good, personally speaking. Because if I'm looking for the code associated to thanks Megan, I will search thanks Megan and I will find it. But what happens if I want to change the code associated to thanks Harry? Thanks Harry, I don't have any thanks Harry file, yeah? So personally, I will rename thanks Megan to, I don't know, thanks. Yeah? It's good to be specific, but it's not good to be over specific. Will it work now? Yes or no? Yes? Okay, let me give you a hint. Are you sure it will work now? Why not? That's correct. If you rename a file, rename it as well here. Thanks. So now, still works. One more thing, the very last styling advice. I told you, every time you create a component, I mean, in this particular case, we got two components in one file, but because they are strongly related. Yeah? But anyways, every time you create a new file, rather than creating a new JavaScript file like that, personally speaking, I like to always create a folder. Right-click new folder. Thanks. And then you drop the file inside of the folder. You see? Why are we doing that? I'll explain that in a minute. But before explaining the reasoning behind, will the code work now? Why not? Correct. Again, once again, the path is wrong. So, look, I can navigate, thanks. Okay. So that refers to the folder and that refers to the file. Does it work? Yes, it works. As you can see, every time I change something, I go to the web browser and I check I didn't break the app. It feels very weird when you are pairing with a junior developer and he or she spends 20 minutes adding 40 changes without looking at the result at any time, and then after 20 minutes, go back to the browser and surprise, it doesn't work. Yeah, never do that. You do one change, you check it works. If it works, next change. If it doesn't work, you fix it. Why? Because if you break the app because of your last change, it will be very easy to understand that this is just because of the last line you wrote. However, if you spend 20 minutes changing 40 lines, you don't know you broke it on line number 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 40. It will take you a while to fix the problem.
I have a question.
Go for it.
In the thanks.js file, they use export
Yep.
function.
Yep.
In app.js, we export default.
Yep.
What's the difference?
Yeah. So once again, export default makes sense if you only want to export one function. In here, how many functions we have? One. That's why export default. If you got more than one function you want to export, you cannot have export default. Default means there is only one. Yeah? You may be asking why the syntax looks different, because what I did before, I did that before, right? However, React is doing that. Both options are equivalent, both are valid. Personally speaking, I hate that. I hate the default behavior. And the reason is, when I check a component, the very first thing I want to inspect is the public interface. I want to see which method or methods are available to other components. If you add an export default at the very bottom, in this particular case, it's not a big deal to identify what are we exporting. But if the app component grows, if I open app.js, just by looking at the file, I have no idea about the public interface of my app.js. the developer is forcing me to scroll to the bottom of the file to understand what can I reuse from the component. Because of that, to be honest, I never understood why React does that out of the box. So what I do is always export default on top of the file, so I can clearly see what is available. Yeah.
What if it's like two small components, so you have two functions with like thanks.js?
Yeah.
Can you add the export at the bottom when you know that you're not adding anything?
The thing is, fair enough. Today, now, this component is pretty simplistic, but it will probably get more complex over time. Yeah. So even if today is fine to add the export here, blah blah blah, at some point it could go down. Yeah. So just to be safe, always, and it's even easier, right? Export function, you know, to me, maybe that's a bit personal. I find that syntax easier than creating the function and then exporting it at the bottom, personally. Yeah. Anything else? No? So, very last question. I told you I created a new folder. Why I created a new folder? Because, generally speaking, I mean, if you create a React component, that implies there is a new piece of user interface. You are adding something in the web browser, right? That means UI. And UI means HTML, means JavaScript, and means what else? CSS. So when you create a UI component, you are likely to style it. If I create a folder, now, for me, it feels very natural to create a new file and call it, unsurprisingly, thanks.css. You see? So now I got all my files associated to the thanks component together. So I can move it, I can do whatever I want. Yeah, that feels very clean to me, personally speaking. So how do we add styles to our thanks.css? Well, for instance, first of all, let's add a class name to the root of each component. Thanks, Megan. And also, here we got thanks, Harry. You see, I'm adding a class name on the root of each component, on the root div, on the root tag, and the name of the class name is the same as the name of the component. You see the consistency. Remember, if you are wrong, be consistently wrong. I'm not sure if that's the best approach, but I'm consistent. That makes my code predictable. That means if you land on a project and you understand the first bit, it will be trivial to understand the second bit because it's exactly the same. All right, so now once you got that, you can go to the CSS. Thanks, Megan. Background color blue, and thanks, Harry. Background color red. Will this work? Why not, Rochelle? That's the main thing. You are right, Rochelle. Look, it doesn't work. And it doesn't work because it's the same thing. We have created a very sexy CSS, but our application knows nothing about it. Yeah? So how do we fix the problem? By importing it. Import, look at the syntax. Thanks.css. That's it. So now thanks.css will be sent to the web browser. Boom. You see, that's my favorite way of creating components. And very, 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 very last thing, from a styling point of view. Did you notice, I don't know, to be honest, if you got that out of the box or I had to edit it, but probably you notice in the code this vertical line. You know what that means? Can you say it again? Don't cross the line. Yeah, I like that. Don't cross the line. Once again, that's just a suggestion. Yeah, I can make my lines stupidly long. But the reasoning behind that line that used to be at 75, 80 characters, depending on the company, is hey, developer. If your code went beyond that line, it's probably time to refactor your code a bit. Yeah, for readability purposes. Look, to me, it's very stressful to do horizontal scrolling to understand the code. Yeah, based on that, can I do that? Yes, of course I can. Now I can check my code without any scrolling. And if you remember, early this week, I told you that I'm not a big fan of that. Does anyone remember why I'm not a big fan of that structure?
Because it doesn't open and close on the same line.
Correct. The opening div doesn't close here. I know some people likes to do super dirty things and then free spaces. That's horrible, right? Even though now it's aligned, it's just wrong to me. So the right or the elegant way to solve the problem is by adding a parenthesis. You see? And now the code is much easier to read. So, do you remember the elegance on Monday on the challenge? Yeah? From an elegance point of view, will we get any penalty? No? Are you sure? I think we will. I think
D should be.
that's correct. Kain is right. Look, because we open in parentheses all the content inside of it, so they move to the right. And the same thing here. If you don't trust me, remember, VS Code can automatically format the code for you. So if I do right click, format document, look, pay attention to line 6 to 8. And then, look at what happened. So I told you as well that sometimes VS Code struggles. To me, this is wrong, right? Look at where that div is closing. That doesn't make sense, personally. Yeah. But anyway, something like that. To me, that will be perfect from an indentation point of view. Any question, guys?
One question.
Yep.
Should the parenthesis also close at the top?
Sorry, you need to speak louder. The questions are not for me, are for everybody.
Should the parenthesis be open and close on the same line, or is it?
No, you cannot do that. So if you are thinking about doing that, that won't work. In JavaScript, you cannot add a return statement after return. Sorry, you can, no, let me rephrase that. You cannot add a break line after the return statement. That's illegal. That function will return nothing. Yeah? So that's the only thing. You unfortunately have to break that rule on the parentheses, but I hope that's a small sacrifice we have to take. Anything else? No? All right, guys. So